Do this.
Let's do this. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Maker That Money here live on the YouTubes. We are here every Friday, most Friday mornings, pretty much every Friday morning at 9 a.m. I am your host, Pooch of Repkord, and with me, as always, King of the Empire of Sticky, Mr. Andrew Mayhall. Good morning, Andrew. How was your week?
Oh, good morning. It has been quite the busy week. How about yourself?
Same. We say it
Yeah.
every time. I can't believe another week's gone by.
Oh my God.
But they just fly by. I mean, like we said, we just here we are accelerating to our
Yep.
death.
Well, yeah, I texted you last night. I was like, I can't believe it's already Friday. Like,
Yeah. So
like
so
it's
we should plan. It's Thursday night. We should probably plan on something. Greetings, Maker Viking. How are you today? Good to see you. Everybody joining us in the chat, feeding us stuff. We will get into what we're going to talk about this week in just a moment, but first a little housekeeping, little call to action. If you're listening back after the fact on the podcast, we are on all the major podcasting platforms because we're that big, right, Andrew?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
we're
we're
huge.
huge.
We're huge. we're kind of a big deal. And we also stream, like I said, live every 9 a.m. Every Friday at 9 a.m. on the YouTube. So if you want to be part of the conversation, you can join us in the chat, feed us questions, all that stuff. We also have our Maker That Money hotline. If you are brave enough to call in and hit us with a question or a comment, you are more than welcome to do so. We have the technology. Repkord.com/MTM hotline for that. Operators are standing by to take your call. So we always love having that conversation. And then obviously we got to tell people if you're new, welcome. This is Maker
Yeah.
That Money, where two makers who have tried or are trying to make a go at making a living out of this. We call it turning our hobby into our jobby here. So I own a small 3D printing, or let's call it a filament furniture.
Filament furniture.
Filament furniture company, and look at me. I made the mistake of not silence. Everybody, please silence your cell phones right now. I don't know. I normally am pretty good about that, but I did not this time. So apologies for that.
Whoopsies.
And Andrew also 3D Gloop.
Yeah.
Give us the elevator pitch on 3D Gloop. What is
Oh, well, we make adhesives, specialty adhesives for 3D printing and additive manufacturing in general.
that? There you go. There you go. Well, this week, let's get into some wins before we start complaining about stuff the way we always do. So we love to share our wins. If you're in the chat, if you're with us, if you've got something you're proud of, something you're happy about, please let us know. We are positive people here, and we like to focus on the win. So I know
Yes.
there's been a lot that you've learned this week, but
Oh,
certainly
yes.
there's been a win as a result of it, and it can be small,
Yeah,
it can
yeah.
be big. What do you got, Andrew?
Well, we're moving forward full steam ahead and preparing for the East Coast Rep Festival. Making some good strides. We have looks like some of our prototype retail packaging coming in hopefully this weekend. So finally
Now that's a big
making
deal. You've been talking about that for quite some time, man, and I'm excited for
yes.
it. I've seen what
Yes.
you've been working on, and a lot of people I don't think really appreciate how much work goes into packaging and presentation
Oh,
and all this stuff. I mean,
so
it's such a
much.
process.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
So I hopefully will be sharing some pictures on Twitter by this weekend.
yeah.
Of how things are progressing.
Good plug for Twitter too. We're both very big
Yep.
Twitter fanatics. Some of us more than others, but our handles are down below. So that's how we kind of communicate with the world with a lot of the stuff that we're doing. If you're interested in following us, I'm at Repkord and Andrew's at 3D
Mm-hmm.
Gloop. So Twitter is a fantastic place to do that. That's great, man. I'm really excited for you. I know you've been working really hard at it, and had your stumbles and falls along the way, but
Oh gosh.
you're getting it done, and that's really really what's important. Finding a way
Mm-hmm.
forward. For us, I would say just like I said, more incremental. Like the story of maker entrepreneurial life is, the 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're refining a lot of our production process to make life easier for us, and to hopefully be able to scale better and optimize costs and stuff like that. And it's always a challenge in this day and age, given the ongoing battle with vendors and suppliers and getting materials, getting raw materials and all that stuff too. So, finding some redundancies always feels good. Negotiating better pricing on stuff always feels good. So, there's
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I wouldn't say no one big win that I would focus on, but just feeling like I'm in a better place than I was last week.
Well,
And I
that's
think
great.
that's all we can ask for,
Yep.
in some regards. And we won't talk about the places where we're not in as good of a place as last week. Thankfully, that's not as big of a thing. But greetings, 3D Musketeers and Mike. Never let the machine win. Never let the machines win, because there's more than one
Yeah.
of them. Good to see you guys in the chat. Thank you for sharing your stuff. Let's see. Maker Viking he's been working on releasing a new printer. I don't know if you've seen this. I've been following him on Twitter.
Okay.
The Fin. I'm not going to pronounce it right. The Fenrir. Fenrir. Not good. But a new Core XY 3D printer that he's been working on looked like a lot of color options, which was cool too. So
Okay.
that was neat. I'm glad to see that you're making some good progress and getting that out there. I know that that's a tough line of work to be in there, just getting a 3D printer made and
Oh,
supported
yes.
and all that stuff. So good on you. Good on you. This week on the MTM, we
Yes.
want to talk about how do we want to phrase this? Because we had so many different ways,
Oh,
cutting
yes.
bait.
Yep.
We talk often about failing and failing fast, and
Mm-hmm.
embracing the fact that the failing is where the learning is and all of that stuff. But we haven't really
Yep.
dove into, at some point you're going to be
Yep.
throwing good after bad just too much, and it's so
Yep.
hard when you're pot committed, when you're in this hand for so long and you just want it to work, and
Mm-hmm.
you're not getting there, and maintaining that perspective and awareness is so hard, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I know you can probably think of a lot of examples of, you've made assumptions about, hey, this is going to be great, and it doesn't end up being, that
Yep.
great. And it's hard, guys. It is
Yep.
so hard to
Yes.
feel like, especially when it's a timely, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
you're and to be able to just like let that go.
Yep.
I had a tweet earlier in the week where I said, change isn't hard. It's actually, change is a good thing. That's typically what gets us to a better place. It's the letting go that's
Yep.
hard.
Yes.
And I don't know, maybe that's not as profound as I thought it was in my head, but I mean, when you break it down and think about it,
Mm-hmm.
most of the changes in my life, I will say, like at the time, yeah, it was hard because like we as human beings have this tendency to want to stay the
Mm-hmm.
course, what's comfortable for us, right? And so
Yep.
letting go of what we know and the way it's always been and all the excuses we have not to change, right?
Yep.
Is
Yep.
really what is distilled down to as the difficult part. And that only gets more difficult the more money
Mm-hmm.
you have in it, the more time you have in it, the more
The further
people,
down
the
that
more
road you
effective,
go.
the further down the
Yes.
road, right? And so we don't want to. We always try to, be as strategic as possible, put as much thought into it, so we don't get caught up in those scenarios. But it still happens.
Yep. Yep.
So, do you have any good examples that you want to share of
Oh,
a
so
time
many,
where you feel
unfortunately.
like you've just been just throwing too much good after bad?
Yep, yep, yep. That what is it? The gambler's fallacy, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I've only gambled away, half of my, life savings. If I just gamble the rest of the half, I'll earn it all back.
That's it. That's exactly
You
it.
know?
I call that
Yep.
getting pot committed, right? You're like, I'm in this
Yep.
hand and I'm not letting
Yep.
go. And sometimes you just got to fold.
Yep. Yep. And yeah, so we've let's talk about one of the biggest. I'll call it one of our biggest kind of mistakes. Um, So 3D Gloop won a very kind of prestigious grant back in 2020, where we were given $50,000 of non-dilutive funding to go out and build the business further. We're kind of a bootstrap startup, much like Repkord. But aside from getting some grants, like we haven't raised any money or anything else, but this was a decent amount given to us, and we elected that we were going to take that money and we were going to commit it to completely revamping the brand and building out a whole new website, e-commerce platform, from the ground up. That dealt with helping us ship our products,
Right.
because our products are classified as dangerous goods, and there's special rules and regulations we have to follow.
Danger paste.
So
Yeah. Okay.
yes, yes. So we had to, we wanted to really invest in, and we see ourselves as an e-commerce brand, a direct to consumer brand. So
Okay.
we really wanted to own this,
Sure.
and so we set out on this adventure to you know rebuild this website from the ground up. And we selected a couple web development companies, pared it all the way down to one specific, and we went and we kept throwing it more time and more money. There was delay after delay,
Right.
issue after issue, tens of thousands of dollars, well above and beyond what the grant that we were given, that
Oh
we just
wow.
kept putting into this.
Yeah.
And we were never, going to be delivered anything, ultimately.
I mean,
And
how does that not feel like fraud? I mean, I guess in a lot of ways
yeah,
it is. Y-
well, yeah, and I don't want to talk too much because there's some other potential legal things that are
Sure.
going on
Okay.
in the background.
Okay.
But you know, the issue was, we thought, so Gloop started as a literally just a little project that we were just going to test and see, are people even interested in this? Does this actually solve a problem in the industry?
Right.
And to at the time when we built our initial website and we were running out the door, it was fast and dirty and quick, and it was what we could set up with the budget that we had at the time, which was basically nothing. We put all of the work in ourselves, and what we found was is like, oh yeah, people were interested. How could we take this and grow it further? And over the course of several years, the company grew. It became a full-time gig for me pretty quick. Things were moving forward. We were climbing up that ladder, and we've always had issues like, oh, I wish our branding, our messaging, or whatever was, a little better, or this or that. And when we had this opportunity given to us where we could go back and we can, kind of fix that technical debt, if you will.
Love that
Um,
technical debt.
y-
Well, don't love it, but yes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we took it, and we were so committed that that was the issue that was one of the biggest issues we had as a company.
Hmm.
When in reality, it really wasn't. It was just an assumption we were making, and it was because
Right.
we were very close to the whole issue itself. You're your own worst critic a lot of times,
Oh my god.
because you can be so close to the issues at hand, and you just beat yourself up constantly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, so basically, to make this long story a little bit shorter, unfortunately we had to learn and come to terms that this was never going to work out. This dog wasn't going to hunt, and we had trained
Uh,
it and trained it and trained it, and it wasn't going anywhere.
Listen, let me
And
add a little bit of context, guys, because you actually contacted me when you first started this, before this project even
mhm,
started. And you had
yes,
written out, and I'd mentioned we've known each other for quite a while
yeah,
now, and I'd mentioned to you that like I in a former
yeah,
life I was a web developer. This is what I did, right? And
hmm,
I've been down this road many a time on many a projects on many 6-figure plus websites and stuff like that. I mean, at large scale.
yeah.
And you had provided the best. I'm not kidding. Like the best outline of I can't even remember. Like I want to say it was like 30-page PDF
It
with
was like 40 pages.
with
Yeah.
40-page PDF of
Yep.
screen grabs. It was the most detailed scope of work I had ever seen in my 15 years of. I'm not kidding, and I would have killed to have that kind of guidance to quote on. as a
Yeah.
developer or as an agency. That never
Yeah.
happens because so much of where the risk as a
Mm-hmm.
development agency lies is in a lot of times in the discovery process and in just
Sure.
prying out what a client wants on their website.
Mm-hmm.
And you had
Yeah.
spent so much time thinking through that, answering these questions. You preempted all of this stuff. And for it to
Mm-hmm.
still have gone south the way that it did is just so gutting to me, because that is just
Yep.
such a gift that you literally handed multiple agencies. And what's weird about it is I suspect, like
Mm-hmm.
many, when you provide too much information to people,
Mm-hmm.
they
Yep.
probably felt overwhelmed, didn't read it, and they said, well, we'll figure
Yep.
this out the way we always do. And that's where the
Yep.
gotcha happened, right? Because you're like, hey, the stuff you started to see, and we're like, this doesn't include any of the things that I had in mind. Did you even read the doc?
Yep.
And I'm
Yep.
guessing no, right?
No, yeah, it was incredibly frustrating, and again, I won't go into too much detail because there's some still ongoing stuff, but unfortunately, the hardest part, and it goes to what you just said, was accepting the change. We just had to learn to just give it up and move on, and it was difficult. It sucked because we're literally walking away from tens of thousands of dollars. Now we did get some things back, but the amount of time and energy invested, that's gone.
I
and
know.
and
Yeah.
that was the hardest time, I think. Besides the money, that was the hardest part. Like money, yes, it sucks to lose money, but it's time, because time you can never get back. Money can always be remade, earned,
Right.
borrowed, whatever.
Right.
You can never get more time.
So
And
that and you know what, I was going to say, recently I had an interesting reframe of that, right? Because we hear that all the time, can't get time back. But in this case, like, you did invest a lot. So I'm just going to
Mhm.
talk about this specific incident here. You
Sure.
invested a ton of time in putting this requirements doc together. Okay.
Mhm. Yep.
And while you did not get what you wanted for that immediately,
Mhm.
you did get a lot of value from that whole learning and experience and stuff. So just because we
Sure.
don't monetize it always in the way that we want, and
Sure.
it's not like you're not going to go through a website redesign again at some point. So
Yeah.
I think you will be able to. Now that's not always the case. I understand that there are times
Mhm.
where it's just, that is a sunk cost. That time is not coming back. We don't do that. We scrap that
Yep.
plan, whatever. Um,
Yep.
so you're right. You're in it at the moment. You feel like, I invested so much time and energy in this, and to go down this path.
Mhm.
Okay. So anyway, continue the story. So what ended up happening, and where are you now with it?
Yeah, so we unfortunately came to the conclusion that this was never going to happen, and that we had at first it was hard, so we started looking for another developer, another agency to start picking up the work where they left off. And we thought we found another one. We sent out all of those requirements docs. We sent out what we had before. We started getting quotes again. We started basically gating this process. And so gating the process means basically you're providing smaller stepping stones. So you're not
Right.
taking as much of a big risk all at once.
Digestible chunks.
Lots
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, lots of checks and balances as well.
Smart.
And we also still ran into issues with that other one,
Yeah.
and that other newer developer. And so it came back to the situation where we're like, okay, well, this is gonna suck, but we're just
Mm.
gonna rip the band-aid off and we're just gonna move forward. And we decided that there's no solution here. All of the time that we've done into it, all of the effort, like, yes, it hasn't necessarily gone to waste, but we didn't get the result that we were planning on. And we just walked away, and we just realized that we just need to spend the time that we have ourselves, make the website, like that we have, work for a little while longer. Let's grow a little bit more. Let's just kind of focus back on the business, the what's core. And what's core is selling Gloop.
Yeah.
What's core is developing new products, growing the brand, which we felt the website was going to do that, but it was possibly just a little misplaced. And I
Nice.
think that's the hardest thing, is
Right.
again, deciding when. We decided way too late. We should have decided a year ago, year and a half ago, when we first got the inkling that, hey, this wasn't going to work. But
Right.
instead, we're like, no, this is the path. This is what we need to do. And we kept
Right.
charging forward.
Yeah. Um, I mean, we've talked about this specific scenario a number of times offline, and it just
Mm-hmm.
pains me, given, like I said, how much work I saw that you put into this, and how much I know that how rare that is in this space, to
Mm-hmm.
just have that kind of direction to quote off, because
Yeah.
it's web development, or a lot of home building,
Sure.
whatever. The devil is always in the details, and you don't get a lot of
Mm-hmm.
detail when you're first getting started. And so when I first got started doing web development, I fell into the same trap that I think a lot of young developers and programmers do, where like this agency just kind of
Mm-hmm.
didn't didn't communicate well enough, which we'll get into in a
Sure.
minute, and didn't ask smart enough. I didn't know what I wasn't going to know. I didn't know what I was going to run into,
Ah. Mm-hmm.
and you get wrapped up in scope creep world, because until something is and this is really really significant, I think, for makers as well. Think about how many times you have a design in your head, and you sketch it out, or you CAD it
Mm-hmm.
up even, and then you actually get a prototype made, whether you 3D print it, machine it, cut it out of
Sure.
cardboard, whatever, and you actually hold it in your hand. And
Mm-hmm.
then once it's tangible, and you look at it, and you're holding it, and you go, this isn't what I thought it was going to be exactly. Not always, but a lot of the time,
Mm-hmm.
until it is tangible, you don't
Yep.
really have the full perspective of what it is. I'm talking in gross,
Sure.
simplification. And it
Yeah.
is so that with web pages and programming, a lot of the time, until you can actually start kicking the tires and navigate and getting, like, you can do as many storyboards as you want, and
Mm-hmm.
sending renders and all sorts of stuff, but until it's dynamic and working and stuff like that, like, that's when, like, really the creative juices start flowing with a lot of people. And so I was spending a lot of time with the whole, well, can you just tweak this and just do this, and let's flip this and move this here. And so there wasn't a well-defined scope, of,
Sure.
like, what exactly they're like, what we really realize now, that we need a whole nother section of the site that does this. We need a form
Aha.
here. We need to, and you did a
Yeah.
great job of laying a lot of that stuff out ahead of time. Most
Mm-hmm.
do not. And so I went from, trying to bid a project, like, at a flat rate, which is what everybody wants, right? Because they need to cap it. They're like,
Yep.
I've got 10 grand in a budget. I've got 50 grand in a budget, whatever the number is. They're
Yeah.
going to want to cap that, right? But you,
Yep.
as the service provider, know
Oh
full
yeah.
well that it is never like,
Mm-hmm.
you're never given a list of, you achieve these 10 things and you get $50,000.
Yeah.
It's, you achieve these 10 things, and then they realize that they want 10 more, plus you have to go back and modify 3, and
Yeah.
so you're either having to grossly overbid, knowing that it's just going to get messy once you actually get down the road,
Mm-hmm.
or you go to a time and materials type thing, which is ultimately, once you build up a big enough client base and portfolio and stuff like that, I don't flat bid projects. I'm like,
Yeah.
here's the
Yep.
hourly rate, and
Yep.
I will change this thing as many times as you want, as
Yep.
long as you're paying for my time.
Yep.
And when you're good enough, you find clients at the level where they're going to be like, great, that's good, let's do that. They realize they
Yep.
want to iterate, they want to just
Sure.
change it until they don't need changes anymore. And the real rub with a website, it is never done.
It
And
is never done.
it is never done. So when you're building
Yeah.
a house, there's a blueprint and all that stuff, and eventually you get to a point where it at least looks like the blueprint. You can make an analogy with a website, but the truth is that it's the content that drives the
Yep.
website and stuff like that. And it's because we want to inject new copy and new imagery and new means of communication constantly, that just makes
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing evolve. So if you were constantly going through and painting your house and tweaking it, you start living in the
Sure.
house, you realize, like, I get no sunlight in this room, I want to knock this wall out and put some windows
Mm-hmm.
in, or whatever. That's web building, or and that's a lot of software programming and stuff as well. So it's like, that's why there's a V1, a V2, a V3 and stuff. Like, we just don't define a website in the same way we do traditional software metrics. But
Sure.
imagine for a moment if Photoshop just it was built, and then it only ever existed as V1. Like that's not a thing, right? Like
Yeah,
one, there's a lot of opportunity to make more money, and a lot of my best clients I made most money with like maintaining sites over time far more than I ever
sure,
did just building a one and done, you know?
sure.
So
Yeah,
so let's bring this back to making world, like I know
yeah.
it was like making websites and stuff before, but like when we talk about getting invested in something and it comes
Mm-hmm.
down a lot of times to that C word, that communication.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the lack thereof, like that's the devil in the details, right? Because the details aren't being communicated.
Mm-hmm.
Mike in the chat, never let the machine win, it brings up, it's tough to get clients to communicate vision in their head into a format that a developer can even understand and interpret to meet their goal. That's a whole different thing, right?
Oh
Because it's
yes.
almost like we're not
Mm-hmm.
even talking the same like languages. I think my bread and butter was often that I did a really good job of going between the technical, because there was a lot of times I was basically a PM where I'd have programmers working for me that clients would they were like, I'll pay you extra if I don't have to talk to this guy, because it's just like they're it's how like a lot of time and I'm being stereotypical
Yep.
there, but a lot of time, especially in the programming world and stuff, like there are amazingly talented programmers out there that lack every social grace there is, and like, hey, see, if they stay in their lane and they code and code monkey, you code and I'll talk to the client and stuff. So being able to be that go between, I'd always
Yep.
say there were far more elegant programmers out there than me, but because I had the communication, the client skills and stuff like that,
Sure.
that's where my bread and butter was. But talk for a minute about communication and
Mm-hmm.
and planning. I would say those
Sure.
two things, right? So
Yeah.
that we those are the things, those are the tools we try to use to avoid falling into the trap
Mm-hmm. Yep.
of
Yep.
continually throwing good after bad, right? Or
Yes, absolutely. So, it's one of those funny things because as you mentioned, I had developed this 40-page document trying to clearly communicate our vision, our goals, our requirements. And we had spent so much time in developing this out and trying to build it into something that could be, even built. And what we failed to actually communicate it was internally with ourselves. What was the problem that we were trying to solve? How was it going to impact our business?
hmm
Which direction we were going overall? We had some general ideas, general concepts, and it was, again, kind of like I attribute this kind of to scope creep. We had worked on that document for months,
yeah.
and it was every time where we're like, oh, well, wouldn't it be nice to do this? Wouldn't it be nice to do this? And we built it up and we said, okay, this is how it's going to connect, or these are the things that we want. These are the things that we don't want. And we got kind of, we put the blinders on where we started focusing on this was the path that we had to walk down to be successful.
hmm
And instead, we should have taken a step back, gone up the mountainside, the hillside, and taken a look down at the direction we were going and see that we were heading out into the middle of nowhere
hmm
where, town was, the other direction. Um, and
Into the
it's,
hinterlands. Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things where there's no real good answer, but I would say that if you don't have someone to communicate with on your goals, try and just take a step back and reflect on different directions that you're heading, like to avoid this trap of, again, becoming pot committed or the gambler's fallacy.
hmm
And ask yourself, what is your end goal and how can you accomplish it in other ways? Really challenge yourself to basically pick apart all of these issues that you're saying that you're trying to solve by going down this direction, and see if you can solve them in other ways.
Good, good,
um
good point. Good advice.
yeah.
Yeah.
Had we realized it a little sooner, had we actually sat down and said, wait a second, you know we had, or put up some, I guess, barriers. If we cross this threshold of, 3 months and we still haven't
hmm
got a deliverable, or
Yeah.
whatever it might have been, uh you know I think we could have made better, decisions, and determined that, hey, we need to cut bait. It's time. It doesn't make sense to keep down this path. But we didn't, because we were so focused on this is the solution. We didn't stop to ask ourselves, could we get it through another way. Um,
You know,
you know.
this is a really interesting challenge because as an e-commerce, as a direct to consumer business, like the website is the
Hmm.
face, right? And we
Yep.
look at it, and I'm the same way. It's like I hate my website. It's fine. It does
Hmm.
its thing and all that stuff, but I know what it could be, what I want it to be, and all that stuff. And so the battle of minimum viable product with that and what I want to convey and present as a company are
Hmm.
constantly at odds. But nobody would fault you for wanting to invest in, like, hey, this is where the rubber meets the road. You know, this is my
Yep.
storefront, right? Like,
Yep.
it's like, to us, it's like if you were to walk into a brick and mortar store and just see, crap all over the floor and all this stuff like
Yes.
this. It's just like that's what it feels like to us because we're in there.
Hmm.
It doesn't necessarily look that way to everybody, right? It's fine. It's
Sure.
clean. It conveys the message. Yes, it'd be nice if we had some other things. Yes, it'd be nice if the back end made our stuff. And that's the other thing is that there's the elements of the website that make
Hmm.
you more efficient and more your process
Yep.
and your production and stuff more efficient. And that's a separate, we talk about that
Yes.
as front end and back end. It's like front of shop, back of
Hmm.
shop, right? So the front end of the
Yep.
website is that which the general public sees and interacts with. The back end is the database, is the,
Yep.
all the little gears and stuff that keep it turning. So if you've ever heard
Yeah.
that term before, and there are developers that focus solely on each of those things, right? The front end
Yep.
developer, the back end developer, you got and then you got the DevOps people that are just keeping the servers running, that like
Yep.
push all this stuff out, and they all kind of have to work together. It's an interesting, interesting mess. But to go back to, what you're talking
Hmm.
about, I would say nobody would blame you for wanting to invest in putting your best foot
Sure.
forward there. The
Yeah.
challenge as a bootstrapped startup is, well, finances are limited, time is limited, energy is
Hmm.
limited. So, strategically we're looking at this and like, with the money that we have, are we best off investing in this? And you might answer this question in hindsight completely differently,
Yep.
right? Because you've
Oh
seen
yeah.
like the sales, like what is the return on investment too on
Yep.
that, right? Because we make
Yep.
assumptions that if I spruce this thing up, my sales are going to
Yep.
double.
Yeah.
And how long is it going to take me to pay off all that website work? I don't know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to Chris's CRS1's point here, I mean, he's calling out something like this is where we failed. The only difference between doing science and screwing around is writing things down.
Writing things
And
down.
we didn't write things down in tracking and understanding where we were going and how we were ending up here. We
Right.
didn't keep waypoints. We didn't
Right.
set waypoints of, oh, well, this month they did this and this month they did this. We were just remembering it in our heads, and it's like, oh, well, it's a feel good sort of thing, or oh, it's,
Yep.
we feel like we're on a better path now. We feel like things are going. We were paying attention to the emotion, not to the actual facts. And that's what
Mm.
happens in gamblers fallacies. You pay attention to the emotion, not the actual facts.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly it. Start looking at how you can write things down, how you can document things. You brought up a great point. I think it was the last episode where you're documenting even the little wins or the little things that you get done in the day, so that you can look back
Oh
and
God,
say,
you
"Oh,
got to
this is
do
all of
that.
the stuff I accomplished."
'Cause I don't
You know?
remember. Yeah, it's for
It-
no other
yeah,
reason that I've got CRS as well, and I can't remember stuff at all. But
yeah.
yeah, documenting that is key. The other interesting, I mean, we could do a whole sesh on on managing vendors and expect
Oh,
and what that, because when you're looking at some of the biggest fails in my business have been around assumptions in working with other companies or people. And
hmm.
and it's enough to make you old and jaded, for sure, because you want to assume that everybody is going to work with your work ethic and
Hmm.
and make
Yeah.
the assumptions that you're going to make, and that's just never the case. But it's also why it's so valuable that when you do find people that are good communicators and reliable and do what they say or own it when they don't, that is worth
Hmm.
$1 million, right? And so
Hmm.
identifying that early in that relationship, whether it's with
Sure.
an employee or with a vendor and stuff like that, because your most expensive mistakes, your biggest pot committed errors, in
Hmm.
my opinion, are going to be tied to those types of things. Because the human
Sure.
factor is always the
Yeah.
X factor in this, right? Like the
Yep.
humans are an imperfect machine. We're emotional, we're
Yes.
unreliable, even the best of us are unreliable
Yeah.
at times and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
so for me, and you talked about this earlier, you called it gating, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
you said like, look, we made the mistake of just like barfing out the entire scope of work and thought like, this is
Yep.
great, it's documented, and they'll just read through it and they'll do exactly what they're supposed to do, and it's got to
That
be
was the
great.
thought.
Oh my god, it's almost worse sometimes with that because it's
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming and it's just like we'll figure
Yep.
it out as we go, and that's a thing. Like if you recognize
Mm-hmm.
that that's happening early on, you got to put the kind, especially if you're working with an agency.
Mm-hmm.
I hate agencies. That's a whole nother thing. They're a grossly inefficient machine
Yes.
that don't do any better and oftentimes worse than just like finding good, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
us don't know how to project manage
Yep.
programmers and stuff like that. So I understand why they
Yeah.
exist and why people want to go down that route. But gating. Okay, so
Yep.
so this is great, and I think a lot of you can think about how can I tie this back to my business. I look at
Mm-hmm.
it as like you give a little leash. You start off, you define the box in which
Yep.
this company or person is going to be working in.
Yep.
You give them very
Mm-hmm.
specific task oriented stuff. You do not go out of this box, and you see how they do with that, right? It's just
Yep.
test. You're just testing them every step along the way,
Mm-hmm.
every new relationship. And I'm not saying you have to be a jerk about it, but literally like
Sure.
spend the time to define the
Mm-hmm.
gate, the small box, okay?
Yep.
And then when they prove they can handle that, then you give them a little more leash. You make the
Yep.
box a little bit bigger. You make it a little bit bigger. And if they can't perform, if they don't, then that's good. And then you've got them contained in the box, and then you just throw the box out with them in it, just like that.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But
That's exactly it.
yeah, they're already in the box. They're already in a box, nice and you just chuck it in the bin.
Yep.
But you guys, I think tell me in the chat how this resonates with you, and think about like even if it's just you, how do I only allow myself this much space? Like that's we call
Mm-hmm.
that focus on our
Mm-hmm.
own space, and that's a
Yep.
again a whole nother thing,
That's a whole nother thing.
right? To
Yes.
get us to stay within a box and prove out that you can provide. But that's what you're doing. That's the whole
Mm-hmm.
process of making. How do you eat the elephant? You do it one bite at a time, and you have to invest in finding those bites and
Yep.
and trying to define it and log it, like you said, keep track of it. And keep track of what you're, and even if you're starting to do things that you didn't have on your list, make sure you're logging that too, just so you have a sense of what you're doing. But I don't know. What do you think of that analogy or
No, that's
whatever
that's
that is?
that's exactly it. And you make an excellent point where focus is essentially your bounding box. And I think that is so important to understand your focus and your bounding box, to make for sure that you yourself don't venture out too far, and again you start engaging in this gambler's fallacy, or this production fallacy, or becoming pot committed to a specific idea because you're out of your depth, or you're out of your focus. And you just keep throwing good after bad in the hopes that, hey, this is going to work. But in reality, you haven't unlocked that level. You haven't matured enough, I guess,
Right.
essentially, to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's lessons learned, hard lessons learned.
Right.
And now I feel like we've made some changes internally, and I think that we're on a better path.
Okay.
But there are always little things that still happen like this. And another great example, and this I think really is going to relate to some of the makers here. For our product packaging, we have been spending so much resources and time on developing what we call retail packaging, so that Gloop can be available in retail locations. We have a retail location literally waiting for our products. It's on us to get it done. And we, you know, did what any company should do when you're building out something new and whatnot. Like you're trying to offload some resources, you're trying to make for sure like you can get volume in. We
Hmm.
went and looked for manufacturing partners to help us with some of this stuff,
Sure.
and we selected a few. We got the quotes. We started working on developing those relationships further, and then it comes back, hey, we're no longer interested in this sort of stuff. The volume isn't there, or it's not what we want to do. Or they would send you quotes that are drastically ridiculously high, and it kept running into issue after issue after issue. And what
Mm,
we finally realized is um that since it is so critical essentially to our ability to actually sell our product, it just actually made sense to just go back and try and find a more creative solution instead
yeah.
of going down this path that we thought, saying, "Oh, hey, if we go this route, we're gonna do what companies do all the time. We're gonna be a company. We're not gonna be a startup. We're gonna
Hmm.
go and do
Hmm.
this." We lost the root of being creative, trying to figure out these creative solutions, figuring out, oh, hey, there's another way of doing this.
That's
And
that's fascinating. No, no, you're totally right, and I think I've fallen into that as we grow as a company,
Mhm,
we realize how precious our time is, and I think so we oftentimes assume like, you know what, let's just find a way to offload this to another company,
mhm,
and I will create spec and get it out there, but then you miss the experience of so in
yes,
this case with your packaging,
mhm,
you actually started with a company like prototyping this, or did you
mhm.
make the mock-up and then did you 'cause
So we
you
made the
didn't go through
mock-up,
okay,
and
go ahead.
yeah, so we made the mock-up, but then we were like, "Hey, could you do this for us?" And we found a company that was like, "Oh yeah, like we could probably do that for you." And so we started down this path, and then it was like, "Okay, well, great." And then once it finally got to like the quoting time where it's like, "Okay, we're ready to actually purchase." Oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's going to be like $2.50 per piece, when we were expecting it to be like 10, 15 cents. And they're like, well, yeah, we're just not interested in doing this project for that quantity.
Right, right.
And we're like, okay, well, crap, what do we do? So we try and find someone else. We try and find someone else.
Pause a second.
And
Where do you
sure.
think that disconnect came from in terms of what your expectation of the price? Like, did they originally quote you that, or did you like just you're like, oh, it's
So
materials? Why you just a bad assumption on your part?
it was a little bit of both. It was a
Okay.
bit of a bad assumption on our part, but I think it was also where they got potentially they got bigger projects. But again, these companies, they want to make, they're in business to make money, and they don't know how long, how many that we're going to order, that sort of stuff. And these this I'll go ahead and kind of explain. These parts that we're getting are thermoformed inserts. They're
Okay.
just little thin pieces of plastic, starts on a sheet, you get it hot, you pull it down on a vacuum or pressure, and you
Hmm.
form these shapes. And
Okay.
it's very common. We could go kind of overseas potentially, and we even like went out that far and trying to find an overseas manufacturer to do this. We found a bunch in the US, and we communicated with all of them. But what it came down to is like, for low volume, and low volume being less than 100,000 pieces,
Yeah.
most of the time they don't spend the time to make the jigs to cut out the pieces that you want.
Right.
So they're hand cut or whatever, or they'll throw it on a CNC router, but it takes a long time.
Right.
And so they make a bunch of money on this. And so I think that that was the big disconnect,
Okay.
where some of the objectives weren't clearly defined in the beginning.
Okay.
Because again, we were like, oh, well, we just need to find someone to go and do this.
Right.
And then when we actually did the math and figured it out, it is significantly cheaper for us to go out and hire an employee, or an actual employee, or someone to go out and actually use a vacuum forming machine that we have access to, and
Right.
cut these out.
Right.
And it was one of those stupid simple things where it's like, well, we can invest a little bit of time in actually making the molds and forming it, and just reliably cutting it. and,
Hmm.
and it it started working really quickly. We're
Yeah.
like, this was silly. Why did we even go down this path? And what we found was the cycle time is, it's stupid low. Like, you can be incredibly efficient. This is something that a maker could actually do and make all of this packaging. We're like, this feels backwards, because it was like I've been being preached to all this time. Like, well, you need to grow. You need to learn how to outsource some of this stuff. You need to learn to do this. When in actually, some of these things that are so stupid simple, that can make an impact on your bottom line. So, the amount of money that you're spending on the packaging material or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and as well get it done quicker. It just
Right.
sometimes it makes more sense. And I lost this creative aspect when I was thinking like, how do I become a company? How do I make for sure that I'm not, like doing all of this work myself, right?
There,
How
there
do I,
has to be a name for this phenomenon because I've fallen into this pit a number of times where
Mhm,
I feel the same as you, where it's like, well, I'm a growing company and we're bigger now than, having somebody in their garage just go and
mhm,
make, 500 widgets for us. Like we should be able to go to a event, which is kind of a dumb thing to say because like at
mhm,
the end of the day, there is no wrong way to go about it. And in a lot of
mhm,
times, like you said, when you stay closer to the process, you get to a better place when you keep your hands a little bit more on it.
mhm,
Excuse me, at least until you reach some degree of maturity. Packaging is a fantastic example of that because
mhm,
the assumptions that you make when you get started and then over time as you go to volume and as you scale and realize like what's needed, what's not needed, you're going to reconfigure things and that becomes incredibly costly to redo. So if you had started down this road, let's
mhm.
just say for in your thing because you're just getting there now, and
Yeah.
you had the 10,000 made that was the minimum order quantity that this vendor wanted, and you realized you know what, I really think it'd be better if we made it this much thicker because then we can do XYZ with it or
Mhm.
whatever.
Yeah.
You now you've become pot committed basically to a process where it's not as ideal, right? And
Sure. Yeah.
so one of the advantages we have as makers is like leaning into the iterating in the make. That was another tweet I had earlier in the
Mhm.
week where I said, "Hey," and this is flippant, guys. Like I think a lot of people kind of miss the point when I say, "Hey, less thinking, more iterating." What I mean by
Mhm.
that is not that you shouldn't think about what you're
Mhm.
doing.
Yes.
It's that the iterating will drive the thought process in a much better fashion for you as you're going. If
Mhm.
you're not like somebody who was it JF was saying, if you're not you don't have Lockheed or Boeing money to just throw at the problem and brute
Mhm.
force it. That's what I call it. Like just
Yeah.
you know, we'll go immediately to scale and they'll just absorb the
Yeah.
cost of that, which is not better
Mhm.
a lot of the time. So I
It's not.
love
Mhm.
hearing the other problem is you got caught in what I call the volume pit or the
Mhm.
scale pit. There is a massive gap, guys, gang, just to
Mhm.
be gender neutral,
Yeah.
between um where where you want to be ultimately and where you're going to get actually like the best pricing for stuff, right? In
Mhm.
that until you can let's talk about your inserts for a second. Until you
Yeah.
can probably get to like a quantity of let's just say 20 to 50,000 or something like that or
Mhm.
100,000. I don't know what that number is. But
Yeah.
there is a number by which you're going to
Mhm.
get a lot more competition for your business, right?
Yep.
Because that's a juicy opportunity for that company, right, to invest in.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
there's also massive opportunity for business ventures and stuff like that working in and that's why I think 3D printing is so exciting right now, working in that small batch space, right?
Yep.
So we think of this with injection molding a lot of the time, right? The
Yes.
gap where injection molding becomes viable has been delayed
Mhm.
by the fact that we now have alternate methods to produce maybe not quite as good as a mold but better in a lot of ways because we can continuously improve along the way and we can
Mhm.
do all that stuff and we don't have to have a minimum order quantity of 20,000, 50,000.
Yep.
And that's really hard as a bootstrap company because it's like you want to be at that quantity where you
Yes.
can be paying 5
Mhm.
cents 10 cents a piece, but to get
Mhm.
there you have to
Yes.
spend $250,000
Mm.
a lot of the time
Yep.
or more,
Yep.
right? And you can't
Yep.
and to go from spending $1,000 a month just paying a maker in a maker space to make these things for you to 200, that's a massive gap, right? That's a
Mhm.
huge pit. That's an opportunity pit too, like I said. If you can
Mhm.
find a solution for companies that are trying to exist in that space,
Mhm.
that small business space, small to medium
Yep.
business space, that's a big
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I like we had spent literally almost a year on this packaging, and in the past week and a half, we have made more progress than we've made in that entire year. And I learned, I'm like, I'm kicking myself because, you know, I fell into this trap of becoming committed. Like, I need to be a company. I need to outsource this stuff. I need to focus on what I do. I became too focused
Right.
on wrong things. And I kept throwing good after bad after, again and again and again, trying to get this thing to go when all I had to do was just take a step back, think for a minute, and say, wait a second, there's potentially another solution here. And then when I started down that route, I found that that solution just made more sense. It was clearly the better way to go, but I didn't know that at the time.
Right. So we have a caller on the line. James, you're with us. How you doing this morning? Welcome to Maker That Money with Andrew and Paige. Oh wow, that was fun. It was like a Baba. We got a Baba Booey. Somebody just made a bunch of
All
noise
right.
and then hung up. I guess that's the dangers of going live and accepting callers and stuff. I don't know if you even heard it. I just heard like a giant elephant noise, and then that was it.
Yeah.
That's fun. Well, to carry on with your, with the conversation of the throwing good after bad and all that stuff. Like we said, we what is the teaching here? What have we learned? Like, is it maybe don't go so quickly to trying to scale, or identify those potential points where
Mhm.
that's gonna get you.
Yeah. So I think it really comes back to, you know, for there's a couple different lessons here. For one, the issue, like, let's look at specifically with our packaging.
Yeah.
Learning again to ask what is the problem that you're trying to solve. Take a step back and go back to, again, kind of sometimes your maker roots. So, like, how can you be creative? How can you come up and solve this problem in other ways?
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and I think that that's really important, but also at the same time, learn to keep track of where you've been. Do some science here, write some things down, keep track of, add some waypoints, and this way you can turn back to those waypoints and you can say, well, hey, I've become pot committed on this because my actions are showing that I keep doing this thing and it's not working. So I've got to change something in order to potentially get a different result. And kind of, go back to the basics, if you will.
Yeah.
I think in both cases, I failed to do that. And it I'm learning. I'm getting better at it. But it's so frustrating to look back and say, well, had I just done this, or had I actually just taken some notes, or had I actually just taken some time to think, you know.
Right. Well, that's all the luxury of hindsight, obviously. So we
Mhm.
talk about, like, okay, how do we how do we give ourselves that? I mean, it's so much easier said than done. Like, oh, let's take a step back and have some perspective. Like, yeah, of course, we all wish that we could do that, but when you're in it, you're just like, oh no, this is just me, going along, and yeah, we're gonna have our, like, snags and stuff like that. But defining the box, setting some key performance indicators, writing contracts. As much as I hate to say it, like, a lot of times I think we get involved in the community and we want to help other people
Mhm.
out, and we're like, I've fallen into this trap before. It's like, oh, why don't you come on, you can help me with XYZ, and then when that person fails to perform, you feel like you've
Mhm.
got a tough conversation in front of you,
Yeah.
instead of just defining very clearly, like, what happens if this doesn't go forward. And we don't want to oftentimes muck up, like, these personal connections with legalese, but
Mhm.
this is your living now. You have to protect yourself, and I think there's reasonable ways to do it, where it's just like, hey, this is just to be fair to everybody. It's very clear. You fall out of bounds, and we'll go our separate ways, and that's fine.
Yep.
Feedback we got a JF in the chat says, reaching out to others for feedback
Mhm.
is trying to get those outside perspectives and stuff like that. And then Grant countered with, well, yeah, but how do you know you can even trust that person's feedback?
Sure.
Trust is it's a tricky fish.
Mhm.
Certainly, I don't think that you necessarily have to take feedback that's given you, yeah, to you with gospel, as gospel,
Mm-hmm.
Grant. So
Yeah.
you can certainly get that feedback and you can be like, okay, thank you. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to act on it.
Yep.
And I think having mentors and being parts of community, I mean, this is where the value of that lies. Like we ping
Mm-hmm.
each other all the time. I'm like, hey man, this happened
Oh
to me today.
yes.
Like, what do you think? And then
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes I'll get to a better headspace just by talking through it with somebody that I trust as, hey, this
Mm-hmm.
is another business owner and has the
Mm-hmm.
perspective. So it's not just it's finding people that are in your like-minded space, like that
Yep.
you're gonna value their opinion the most. But again, cast a wide net
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. Spend some time to think on it. Just have some self-awareness too, that hey, maybe I am getting caught up in this.
Sure.
Easiest way is to look at how much money you've spent or how much time you've spent, which is why I say it's important to log what you're doing even when it's not initially on your list, so that you can maintain that perspective of, whoa, I've
Yep.
actually been burning a lot of hours on this. Are we getting anywhere? you know
Yep. Yep.
so
Exactly.
and it doesn't do you any good unless you stop and reflect on it too. So we
Mm-hmm.
I am completely imperfect in this, like, the whole, hey, slow down, stop, reflect. Are we going down the right path? you know that's that's a tough one. And now Andrew has fallen out of the feed. Wow, it's been a day of fun technical issues here. Um, we'll see if he comes back. Oh, look at that. He just showed back up again. Thank goodness.
I think I'm back.
We were either going to wrap early or we were going to give it, we was going to give you a couple minutes.
I
And I
think I
was going to
lost
take
internet.
questions.
Something froze.
That
Oh,
was
technology.
a fast fleeting internet dump. But yeah, these are the joys of technology. Um, Man, we could go on this subject, I think, for quite some time. And I didn't even really get into a lot of the examples of this in our business. But I think if we all step back and think about it, hindsight's always 2020. It's easy to look at
Mm-hmm.
it and be like, man, I should have done that differently. Um,
Yeah.
you know, my big piece of advice, like we've been talking about, okay, here's how you can maintain some perspective. Here's some tools maybe to help fight it. But the mental health aspect of, don't beat yourself up so much about it, and also value the lesson. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there is no such thing as perfect form in any of this.
Yep.
It is a very messy, very imperfect thing. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times it can cost you a lot of time and money and energy, and it is a really, really hard thing to not get down on yourself about. But
Mm-hmm.
as I always say, a lot of times it's like, you know what, you're gonna have bad days. Get to the next day and
Yep.
sleep on it. Get to the next week. Just keep moving forward. You'll figure. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
figure it out. That is one of the pieces that I'd like to end on, because I think we have jammed down our throat all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Keep putting one foot in front of the other. Keep on mucking forward,
Yes.
and that is oftentimes what leads us to this trap to begin with, right? Because we're like, well, I
That's
can't
exactly
give
it.
up. And I've had moments where
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I'm gonna go down with this ship.
Mm-hmm.
If this is the last thing I do, if I need to prove, like, we feel like we've got something to prove to people, we feel like we need, maybe we have investors or whatever that we need to pay back and stuff like that. We're not
Yep.
saying that you're giving up, right? Because there's
Mm-hmm.
any steps along the way where you can make an
Mm-hmm.
argument for, just because you're
Yeah.
backing away from a specific decision does not mean you're
Mm-hmm.
giving up, right? It's
Yep.
a pivot. There was, I can't
Yep.
remember who it was that tweeted out yesterday, I think. I've got a lot of respect for people that have started a business and failed. And
Mm-hmm.
like I said, like, just to reframe that, because I don't think a lot of entrepreneurs really think about, like, that was a failed business. Yes, there are times where there is a clear delineation that the business failed, but a lot of times it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a pivot, right? It's a, you know
Mm-hmm.
what, we just kind of moved on to doing something else, and we rebrand it. Like, you're never really, I don't know a lot of people that are truly entrepreneurs that are just straight giving up and then never do anything
Yep.
ever again.
Yep.
The main mindset, we have that term serial entrepreneur for a reason. They pivot,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yep.
and it's just, you're just moving between things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. What do you think? How do you weigh that difference between like keep marching forward, keep trying,
Hmm.
and not
Yes.
keep marching to the point where you're gonna fall into a pit again?
Yeah. So I think it comes back to um learning, like, as you were saying, learning to not, kind of, I guess, beat yourself up and understand that failure is okay. So many times we always we're scared of failing. As a, as an entrepreneur, failing sucks, but in a lot of cases that's what provides the lesson. And sometimes cutting bait, and you need to realize it's the best option for you.
Yeah.
Yes, it might suck, but at the end of the day, it's going to end up helping you. And so I think for me, as a, just on a personal note, like, is learning to accept that failure a little, a little better than how I have in the past, and just move on to the next thing. Understands, like, okay, hey, this didn't work, let's go back, let's be creative, let's try and figure out another way, another solution.
Right.
um
So
so
so we've got another caller on hold, but now I feel like I've been burned once. So now the question
yeah.
is, do we fall into our own trap here of potentially,
Where do we
it's
cut bait?
like, yeah, or do we cut bait? I think, is it a fool me twice situation? Do we get a fool twice? So we try bringing them on and see what happens? What's the worst that could happen, right?
Yeah, what's the worst could happen,
All
eh?
right, we've got a JF now. Let's see if we actually get, they are unmuted and with us. Can you hear us, JF?
I can. Can you hear me?
We can, and it sounds
Yes.
like
Okay. Yeah.
a
No,
normal
I don't
human.
have any crazy scream sounds. Yeah. I've been listening to your conversation, and sometimes it's like, when do you call it quits? When do you call that a failure, though?
Right.
Like, because is it and it's taking a step back and then re like looking at what it is that you're considering potentially a failure, and then being like, let me approach that again. Have you really failed if you're still working on it, but now just on a different angle?
Sure.
Like,
That's an
I would,
interesting point.
if
I
you
would
want to think
say
about it
no.
that way, right?
I would say no, but it just, I think
Right.
a lot of that depends on who you are and what your mentality is and stuff. Like fail is only, I guess, how you define it.
Hmm.
So it's
Yeah,
it's
it
a
is
great
how you
question.
define it. It could be a blocker, right? It's like, okay, but failure. It to me, defining a failure is truly putting something down
Hmm.
and then walking away from it for good and saying, you know what,
Yeah.
that's just not going to be a thing. And at
But
that point,
is it
it's like,
like the website? Is it ever really done? Like, because like you will still
Sure.
keep that
No.
with you. You will still use that. Like, even though it
Yeah.
seems like you've defined that point,
Hmm.
I would say that, there's always something there to learn from, some value, something that you're going to use later in your life. But I hear
Sure.
I hear what you're saying. It's an interesting balancing act. I don't know.
because
Yeah.
like, on a website particularly, it's like, it's all framing, but it's like,
Hmm.
okay, so if the website's not good enough, are you failing at your website, or is it just not good enough right now?
That's it.
Yeah.
Or, and it's
That's
like,
it. That's exactly it.
it's like, and those the words matter, right? Like, the way our psychology of our brain, like, those words matter, because then that puts you in a certain mindset, right? Like, oh, no, I'm failing, oh no, like, or if you're like, oh, I got a problem, and you're going to dig into it, right?
Hmm.
It's like,
Hmm.
for me, particularly, so I bought this CR30. I have a part that I needed to have made, and I haven't been able to get that thing to work. Okay, I've got all your goodies on it.
I
I got all
see
your
what's
goodies on it.
happening here.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's some
this
live
is what this
technical
call's
support.
about. That's right. That's right. No, 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 no. I'm done. So this is one of those things. It's like, well, so I put it in the chat. I've been grinding on this thing for weeks, and I hadn't been making parts, right? So I've got my stuff out of stock. I'm like trying to get this thing working,
Yeah.
and I'm like, at the end of the day, it's like, am I am I jumping back into being a hobbyist and just tinkering with a machine, or do I need to get product right out?
Yeah.
So I went ahead and I
Mm.
switched gears, put the thing down, ordered another printer, and I'm going to get that ball rolling, and then I'll get back to this printer.
Yep.
Um,
My God, do I
There you
feel
go.
this? I
you
can't.
just have to
I,
pivot.
I can't begin to tell you how many hours I have on that CR30 platform with the exact same thing that you're talking about, where it's like, I don't have time and I've paused, and then like that's kind of why on our website he's talking about a belt 3D printer for those that don't know, which is kind of a new piece of tech where you're basically printing on a conveyor belt, which industrially potentially has a lot of amazing potential to it to just work endlessly nonstop and all that stuff, but it is still a hobbyist. It's born of a hobbyist grade company and machine, and it's got a number of things with it, but it's part of the reason that we kind of like, you see we had this kit and then we added this kit, because you're literally experiencing my iterating and adding and experimenting over time. Like, I didn't just release like, here's all the upgrades you need and then you're going to be perfect, because well, one, it's very much there's a right tool for the right job for the right part. And there are certainly parts that are way, way, way better suited to be run on belt printing than others. And so I think that we as makers oftentimes look at like, how can I automate? And this seems like some low hanging fruit, right? This is
that
great.
was exactly the idea. It's just like, hey, I can do this. I could be out all day. I can be knocking out some stuff, and I don't have to think about it. Doesn't really work that way though. And it's like, okay, this kind of threw off that idea. Let me move on. And 99% of this has to do with belt adhesion. It has nothing. Your parts are probably the only reason I got as far as I did, but it was just, I'm serious, because at the end of the day, the print quality looked amazing if I can get it to stick.
Right.
But I know that that's not what this conversation's about, but like, just as a side note, that was just like one of the big things. It's like, hey, but
you're getting into something we've been talking offline about. We've been talking about doing some belt school and some and we've got some other adhesion product. A whole nother belt we've been trying to work on getting launched to address these things, but it's these things take obviously a lot longer than we think. But this is a great example, and I appreciate your call in and your perspective on this, and feel free to hit me up offline if you want to chat a little bit more. I might have some ideas for you, at least to get going. But I appreciate, let me just tell you this really quick before you go. I appreciate that you're putting the work in, because I can't tell you how many people seem to have this mindset that like, oh, as soon as I put all these things on there, all my problems are going to be solved. No, that's not how this works at all, guys.
Right. No, definitely. No, I know. And so, but again, it's just like the failure thing. It's like, well, did I fail getting the CR30 to work? Nah, I just got to get back to it.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'll get back to it.
That's a great, it's failure is really only defined by time in a lot of, because we have this line to work on, like you said, if as long as you just kind of and a lot of times it's a great strategy, just put it down for a little bit and come back to it, and just new things will come from that. So anyway, Jet, thank you so much for a call. Appreciate your perspective. It's always good to have somebody else to chat with. Enjoy your day, my friend.
Will do. You too.
All right. Take care. Bye. Good guy. No, and I appreciate it. He's, for those that aren't aware, he's referring to some tools that we use in a lot of our production, and that printer is like one of the coolest and most terrible things to ever happen to me, honestly, for a number of reasons. But I think that at the end, it's making me a better maker and business owner and stuff like that, because I think it's helping me refine how we do things and how we keep perspective on stuff. But that his point about like looking at failure on a timeline and really, like, I guess the true term of fail would be like you fail and then you die, like, and then there's no time left, and then that's it. But other than that, it can you're just tucking in a box. And sometimes, I don't know if you've had things, but I feel like I've had projects that I've tucked away for years sometimes.
Absolutely.
Fixing my house, where I get so frustrated putting in trim or whatever, I'm like, and then I come back to it and I have a completely different method. And so,
absolutely.
Was it a fail? No, it was just hibernating. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no failure. There was just hibernating ideas. That's
hibernating. I say reassign your objectives, right? It's the reassigning of the objectives.
Framing, reassigning. Yeah, man, great convo, guys. Thank you for the chat. Everybody that's been with us in the chat. We had another good solid 60. A little bit over this time, but it's always good talking to you guys. We wish you, as always, a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to chatting more on another fun and exciting topic next Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific here on Maker That Money. If you haven't done so yet, please like, subscribe, ring the bell, do all those things. Tweet at us, ideas. We love hearing from you. We do. We do.
Yes.
Please reach out. Until then, Andrew.
Yeah.
Love you, man. Keep
Love you
on,
too,
keep
dude.
on, keep on tacking up those wins, okay? And write them
Yeah,
down
let's do it.
for science.
Yep.
we'll
I
chat
got to do
on
more
them.
science.
Just keep sciencing, guys. Just keep
Yep.
sciencing. All
Yep.
right. Till
Awesome.
then, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
See ya.